Hello, it's me again. Don't worry, Maddie's back on Monday, but he asked me to tell you a little story today. You see, a long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, well, it was our galaxy, and it was 2003, but in the summer of that year, I experienced my very first breakup. As you probably know, the first one is the worst. The end of the world. I was devastated and thought I'd never recover. I couldn't eat, sleep, or concentrate. But there were two games that pulled me out of it. And one of them was Star Wars Galaxies.
My backpacks got jets. Well, I'm Boba, the fat. Well, I bounty hunt for Java Hut to finance my vet. Well, I chill in deep space. A mask is over my face. Well, I deliver the pride boss, so narrow my eyes, cause my time I don't like to waste. Get down.
If you're old but never played it, you'll probably know it from this OG YouTube video, or even well before YouTube even existed. Developed by Sony Online Entertainment and published by LucasArts, hey, Star Wars Galaxies had it all. Well, except story, at the beginning at least. Originally taking place between A New Hope and The Empire Strikes Back, Star Wars Galaxies was a dream come true to me. Multiple races to pick from, multiple planets, an economy fully run by players, player cities, player houses. You could be a medic, brawler, marksman, scout, entertainer, or an artisan. And you could then specialize in becoming a bounty hunter, creature handler, ranger, doctor, even a musician. That's right, you could play music or become a dancer. And these professions were actually viable in the game. You needed every class working together to defeat enemies, and the PvP was a godsend. The grind was slow and hard, but so incredibly rewarding, and the most important part was no Jedi. The Jedi weren't a class you could pick. Only a very secret selection of player actions would open up a Force-sensitive character slot. You had to achieve the master rank in various professions and find secret holocrons telling you which ones those were. Because of the difficulty and hard grind to eventually become a Jedi, only a very few select players on a server had the tenacity and endurance to become one. Hell, it took 4 whole months after launch for the first one to even appear. PvP battles involving Jedi were downright massacres. They'd be able to slaughter multiple other players at once before they even got a dent in them. For a brief moment in time, at launch, Star Wars Galaxies was beautiful. But what do we do with beautiful things? We ruin them. And so, 2 years after launch, they implemented the new game enhancements, or NGE. This basically meant that they dumped the whole thing down, including the combat, and Jedi became a starting profession. This led to a ton of players abandoning Star Wars Galaxies for that other MMO that recently launched. It still managed to hold on for a couple of years and had a few really good expansions and story elements implemented. But the subscriber count dwindled, and at the end of 2011, Sony and LucasArts pulled the plug on Star Wars Galaxies. I was devastated and thought I'd never recover. I couldn't eat, sleep, or concentrate, but there were two games that pulled me out of it, and one of them was Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic. Developed by the geniuses over at BioWare, this single-player role-playing game set almost 4,000 years before A New Hope had it all. Amazing quests with plenty of choices and consequences, fantastic characters, well-written companions with their own questlines and backstories, multiple planets, real-time with pause combat, and one of the best main stories ever seen in a game. I bought on Xbox specifically to play KOTOR, and despite just having experienced one of the most painful breakups of my entire life, up until that point, it made the summer of 2003 downright magical. I'd spent days doing every quest I could find, exhausting every dialogue option, mastering the combat and my gear, while taking in the beautiful scenery of Tatooine, Kashyyyk, and Dantooine. KOTOR was practically perfect in every single way. We've actually got a question about this from one of our Patreons. Mario Zapita asks, what are things you are wanting for the KOTOR remake? Well, I'd keep it as much the same as possible. Of course the combat is going to have to get an overhaul because that didn't age very well, but other than that, update the graphics and the UI and we're pretty much set. It would be awesome if they add more quests, companions, and story elements, but to be honest, KOTOR already stands on its own. You know, the weird thing about history is that whether we like it or not, it often repeats itself. And so in the winter of 2011, I was fresh out of college and had just broken up with my long-term girlfriend who I honestly thought I was gonna marry. I couldn't eat, sleep, or concentrate, but there was one game that pulled me out of it, and that was Star Wars: The Old Republic. Once again developed by the geniuses over at BioWare, this MMO with hardcore role-playing elements set 3,656 years before A New Hope was the game I've been looking for my entire life. It already started at the character creation, where you couldn't just pick any race, and it depended if you were on the side of the Galactic Republic or on that of the Sith Empire. Each side had 4 classes to pick from, and when you reached level 10 in the game, these classes would give you the choice to split up into one of 2 subclasses, and that was it. You were locked in. Hard choices had to be made right from the get-go, which helped with the immersion and role-playing elements. Speaking of which, that's exactly what the Old Republic, or SWTOR as we'll call it from here on out, is all about. Role-playing. There are 8 vastly different origin stories, or in this case class storylines, 4 for each side. On the Galactic Republic, or light side, we have the Jedi Knight, which is the traditional Star Wars story. We travel all over the galaxy in an attempt to stop fallen Jedi who joined the Sith, and even though there might not be as many surprises during this main story as in the other classes, the last act, and especially the final boss of the Jedi Knight storyline, are still among the best, most jaw-dropping moments I've ever experienced in a Star Wars game. Truly fantastic. Meanwhile, the Jedi Consular is a story all about finding the origins of a mysterious plague and how it connects to the Sith. All the while you're trying to keep the alliance intact. It's well written and has some surprising twists and turns, but out of all the Force users in the game, I gotta say this is probably my least favorite. Now either side also has 2 non-Force users, and the first one for the Republic side was the Smuggler. I love how different and personal this class story is. It starts off with something as simple as your ship getting stolen and quickly devolves into us hunting down a treasure and accidentally uncovering an Imperial plot with dire consequences for the entire Republic. This was the first class I played back in 2011, and in hindsight maybe that wasn't the best choice, because even though it really drives up the personal stakes and connections to the dark belly of the underworld, which I personally love in Star Wars games, it also has a much lighter and sometimes even almost comedic tone compared to the other class stories. I guess you can kinda compare it to Solo, the movie, which to be honest was pretty good, but that's a matter of taste of course. The other non-Force user is the Trooper, and this one is entirely military-based, which again is so different than what we're used to from Star Wars. As the newest member to Havoc Squad, you're sent to Ort Montel to locate missile launchers being used by separatists. I'm trying to keep these little summarizes as short as possible, so I won't get into what happens next, but I can tell you that the Trooper storyline is mostly regarded as the least engaging one. Although it starts off the fastest, with a few shocking moments, and it gets gradually better to be honest. You basically travel from planet to planet trying to expand Havoc Squad, but the reasoning is once again really cool and unique. Now moving over to the Empire side of things, we start off with the Sith Warrior. This one is definitely in my top 3 and is a story all about power. We have to prove ourselves to Darth Barris by defeating our rival, and once we do, he sends us on a mission around the galaxy to find out why or how the Republic keeps discovering his sleeper agents. This is the class story where we can really feel our character getting stronger, and the choices we make along the way have a larger impact, but more on that in a little bit. The Sith Juggernaut and his one-handed lightsaber are a joy to play with, especially in the combat. Next up is the Sith Inquisitor. We start down in the dumps, literally, as a slave, but while proving ourselves in the trials and gaining the favor of the cunning Lord Zash, we manage to pull ourselves up in the search of a lost relic, which might give us infinite power. Meanwhile, the Sith Empire gets more and more under the influence of Sith Lord Darth Tanaton, who wants to pure the Sith Order of all non-traditional elements, possibly like yourself and Lord Zash. Some of the powers you get while playing as the Sith Inquisitor are downright fantastic to use during combat, but we'll get to that soon. The Bounty Hunter is the Sith Empire equivalent of the Smuggler, with less laughs but even higher personal stakes. You want to participate in a great hunt where the best bounty hunters in the galaxy aim to gather riches and glory. To do so, however, you need to get invited by Nemro the Hutt, and he only has one spot left. So we travel the galaxy, competing against other bounty hunters while using everything we can take to take down our targets. This is a story about backstabbing and betrayal, because at some point, as you might have guessed, the hunter becomes the hunted. Again, such an interesting take on the Star Wars universe. Role-playing as an actual bounty hunter, how can it possibly get more awesome than this? And then it does, with the Imperial Agent class. You've probably heard it before, and the rumors are true. This class story is impeccable. If you've seen Andor and you liked it, this is the one for you. If you've ever wanted to know the insides of the Sith Empire and how it operates, pick the Imperial Agent class. It starts off pretty simple on Hada, where we have to basically coerce Nemro the Hutt to work with the Empire. But it soon devolves into uncovering galaxy-wide terrorist cells and working together with unexpected allies to take out a threat that's not only dangerous to the Sith Empire, but to the galaxy as a whole. This is by far my favorite story. It has the most impactful choices, some of the best dialogue options, and the companions you get along the way are so interesting. Oh yeah, just like in KOTOR, there are companions in SWTOR, and they're a huge part of the game. Each story class gets 5 of their own companions, with their own personalities, questlines, and dedicated rank. Now remember, we're still talking about how the game played, looked, and felt in 2011. We'll get to what changed later. You had to think about what companions to bring with you in combat. The Inquisitor, for instance, had Cam Val, which was the best tank in the game. He would slaughter everyone for you. You could give your companions better gear so they'd perform better in combat, but the best way to do that was to raise their influence level. You had to give them gifts or make choices during the game they'd agree with. And as their influence level rose, you get more information out of them and their personal quests and stories slowly opened up. We'd even get to send them on crafting missions, because in SWTOR, our companions do the crafting, which again is such a unique and well thought out system. And if their influence level was high enough, oh boy, did they do good damage during the combat. Combat in SWTOR is the pretty standard MMO toolbar combat you've seen in plenty of other games. Again, just a reminder, we're still talking about how the game was in 2011. The toolbar at the bottom and later the sides hold your skills. You press their respective number on the keyboard whenever they're done reloading, and you repeat the process until all enemies are dead. This might not look engaging when you're watching it in a video, but it's actually pretty fun and addictive. This wasn't really that different from other MMOs, but it does the job and it does it well. Now, in my opinion, what made the combat in SWTOR so cool and different from most other MMOs at the time was that it was actually hard. It took some skill and strategy to defeat enemies, and you couldn't just run up to them and stand there while they fall. You had to use your companions, aggro certain enemies, and your skills played such a huge part in this. Those skills you could only get from trainers. Every couple of levels you get new ones, and you had to find a trainer and pay them to get these skills, which gave you such a high incentive to make money in the game. The same goes for loot. The leveling itself was slow, but in a good way. You actually had to work for it and do the side and planet quests that fleshed out the lore of the planet you were on at the time. Each planet was filled with fully voiced side quests and planetary quests. Sure, some of them were definitely of the fetch quest kind, where you had to kill this amount of enemies or gather that amount of resources, but it fleshed the game out. It made you think more about what you were doing and why you were doing it. It also had you long for that one skill you knew was coming up, but were just a little too underleveled for, or didn't have enough currency to buy yet. All of these additions, and especially the companions and excellent quest design, are amazing and something revolutionary in the MMO genre, even to this day. BioWare wasn't lying when they said they basically made KOTOR 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 and put them all in one game. But there are a couple of hard restrictions to it, which doesn't quite make it the same as a true single-player experience. Companions can't actually die or leave, at least not in the base game. We'll get to the expansions later. But you can romance them. The choices you make during the many quests, main side and planetary, have a confined impact. You wouldn't be able to change the entire galaxy, of course, so the consequences of your choices would mostly be confined to a couple of instances. Which is honestly fine, because at its core, SWTOR is still an MMO. And that's also where SWTOR falters a little. Because not everyone can be the best Jedi in the universe. That would make it quickly become meaningless. Immersion is tough to nail in an MMO, because it needs to offer the same experience to every player while still making it feel distinct. And so you'll see a lot of situations like this, where the art design, graphics, and music are beautiful, but the non-quest NPCs are soulless and just standing there repeating their animations for all eternity. Now, this is a good moment to bring up that this entire game, save for the expansions, is completely free, which is nuts. You've got hundreds of hours of excellent Star Wars storytelling you can play right now without ever having to pay a dime. If you decide to buy a subscription, which you can cancel after just a month, you actually get to keep all the expansions that were included, which again is nuts. The first two, Rise of the Hutt Cartel and Shadow of Revan, are free as well and will level you from level 50 to 65, but it's the ones after that personally really got me going. In the fall of 2015, I was working a dead-end job and had very little ambition to make something of myself. My girlfriend at the time understandably had enough of the slacking and dumped me. But the problem was that I didn't really care. I wasn't devastated, could still eat and sleep if I wanted to, but noticed that nothing really affected me anymore. But there was one thing that pulled me out of it, and that was the SWTOR expansion, Knights of the Fallen Empire. The first 9 chapters dropped right away, with the other 4 dropping later that year. Now at this point, SWTOR had already gone free to play, so you gotta give it to them that they kept supporting it this way and kept innovating it. New planets, new companions who would actually leave, betray you, or could even get killed this time around. Choices mattered much more instead of the regular binary light or dark side ones, and were no longer confined to instances. The consequences of these choices would sprawl all over the galaxy and cause branching storylines. To me, this expansion was almost KOTOR 3, almost. That's just an opinion, of course. I know lots of people who prefer Shadow of Revan or some of the other expansions, but this was the one that hit for me and gave me back my love for gaming and life as a whole. They released a couple of other expansions after Knights of the Fallen Empire, like the direct sequel Knights of the Eternal Throne and Onslaught. At the end of all of these, you were level 75 and as powerful as you could possibly be. Star Wars The Old Republic had a few minor issues, but overall was a fantastic MMO with brilliant writing, well-developed companions, and decent, hard but fair toolbar combat. It was beautiful. But as we've already been over, history repeats itself. And what do we do with beautiful things? We give them Update 7.0, Legacy of the Sith. Now, I hadn't played SWTOR since 2017, so when Maddie asked me to make this video, I was very excited. However, as soon as I started up the game, I realized what had happened, and it's something that has happened to every long-term MMO out there, and it brought me all the way back to Star Wars Galaxies, because SWTOR got streamlined. When making a new character, you can now pick multiple combat styles. A Jedi Knight can now be a Guardian, Sentinel, Sage, or Shadow. The non-Force users, like the Imperial Agent, even have 8 styles to choose from now. What's also new is that after completing the main story, or the first 3 chapters as it's called now, you can pick a second combat style. You'll get presented with a cutscene where you basically pick between the 2 other options and can freely switch between the 2 and their respective skills. This isn't necessarily a bad thing. I mean, it's pretty cool that my level 70 Sith warrior can now also become a Sith sorcerer at the switch of a button, but it does take away some of the hard roleplay elements I personally like in these MMOs. However, where things really got me irked was in the base game. Combat is suddenly as easy as it gets. You can basically stand still next to enemies and just press the toolbar keys without ever being in danger. They took out every challenge. Now, to a lot of people, this is probably not very important, but personally, I love feeling my character getting stronger, overcoming obstacles and enemies I couldn't do before. The leveling also went extremely fast and didn't require trainers anymore. I went up to level 10 in no time and just got every skill automatically. They also added my most dreaded gameplay mechanic of all time, which is level scaling. Again, this is just a personal opinion, but I can't stand level scaling ever since Oblivion. Lower enemies should be easier to kill, so you'd feel powerful and feel the progression you've made, while higher enemies should be harder to kill. Put them all on the same level scale, the same as yours, and where's the game? Companions can now fulfill any role, their gear is purely cosmetic, and their stories automatically open up to you. Again, I get why they did this. It makes sense from a business standpoint. Get people to level up fast so they'll want to use the store to get those little subscriber enhancements, but to a longtime player and MMO lover like myself, this is pretty much the opposite of what I like. The absence of difficulty or absence of challenges don't make me want to play a game. That's why I love watching movies or read books. But I again fully understand that's not the case for everyone. We've got a question from our Patreon that leans into this, cause Meatball asks, I've always been interested in trying this game. I've only ever dabbled in other MMOs. How is the new player onboarding compared to other games? Well, I think the new player onboarding is terrific, and that's why they made these changes. They want you, as a new player, to come in, experience the story, and level up as fast as you can. That's also why they took out a lot of the side quests, so the map is now filled with more lifeless NPCs. Luckily, the planetary quests are still there, but if you do them all, including your class story of course, you'll quickly become way over-leveled, and the challenge is just completely gone. There's a lot of people who actually like this though, who don't have the time to invest hundreds of hours into an MMO and just want to experience a great Star Wars story. And for those people, all these changes are perfect. So if you recognize yourself in that, which is awesome, I can only highly recommend it. I learned that the difficulty is still there, but it's all in the endgame content. We haven't talked about the typical endgame MMO content because usually that's not the type of content I play an MMO for, but I will highlight them here because they've become increasingly important and are now a huge part of the main game because you get there so fast. There's the conquest system, where every week you get specific rotating game objectives to earn points, gear, currencies, and crafting materials. Conquest with guilds can get you guild strongholds and perks when leveling up the guild. It also works for solo players. Honestly, it's a really nice system and a good incentive to keep you playing. During the course of the story, you also get your own stronghold which you can decorate, and which is really cool because your other characters on the same server can visit that stronghold. There are flashpoints, which are basically dungeons with up to 4 players. They're instant missions with various objectives, and here you can set the difficulty to story mode, veteran mode, or even master mode for level 80 players who are looking for better gear. There are war zones like arenas, which are basically small 4v4 combat dueling maps, or battlegrounds, which are way bigger and require groups to play hotball, for instance. These are set in tiers with gearing bolsters and really start to shine once you hit level 80. There are even galactic starfighter space battles where you capture objectives or play team deathmatch. This has its entirely own upgrade and progression system, which is awesome. And then there are the operations, which are basically raids and hold the most difficult enemies in the game. Again, you can change the difficulty here to make it more or less challenging. So there's a lot of high quality endgame content, which is clearly where now Broadsword and BioWare before them want you to get to as fast as possible. We've got a question from Midnight over on Patreon who asks, yes, this game is really good for the story, like a single player game or a game you play with a friend or two. As an MMO though, I didn't enjoy it as much as I'd like. One thing I think they could do and would massively benefit from is port this over to consoles. I actually agree, and I think if that was possible, they would have done it by now, like Square Enix did with Final Fantasy XIV. I've played a bit of it over the past week and a half on Steam Deck, and even though I had to use the trackpads, it worked and it was fun. I do think the engine, and especially the UI, currently don't lend themselves to a controller layout though, and that's where the problem is. There are so many menus, skills, and keys to press that a controller probably isn't gonna cut it. It would be awesome if they somehow figured it out though, because like you said Midnight, that would give a lot more people the opportunity to experience the great stories in this game. Star Wars The Old Republic is a tale of 2 games, a fantastic and deep single-player experience trapped in an MMO, and a pretty good MMO trapped in the current day easiness of the genre. Maybe you completely disagree with me, but man, do I miss the old days of MMOs and the Old Republic. You had to put in the effort to overcome challenges, and not just in the endgame. Gameplay came first, always, and more story was the reward for overcoming those obstacles. Now, this might sound a bit negative, but that doesn't mean SWTOR is bad. Quite the contrary, I'd actually say it's still pretty amazing. It has hundreds of hours of excellent Star Wars stories ready for you to jump in right now, and if you've never played it before or are new to MMOs in general, I can only highly recommend it. Personal issues aside, let's be real here. I spent hundreds, maybe over 1,000 hours in SWTOR over the past decade and a half, and I don't regret a single second of it. This game was absolutely terrific, got me out of multiple real-life obstacles, and is still awesome. I hope you give it a chance and let me know what you think of it. I'll be here again next Friday, where we might take a little trip to the Greek islands. But until then, have a great week, my friends.